Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello?
Could I please speak with Ramsess?
Speaking.
Hello, Ramsess. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. I'm really so delighted you accepted to take our call. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Let me start by asking you, how have you been living these past, really 6 months at this point of this pandemic, and where do I find you?
Well, I've been living day by day, but I've been still creating my art and staying safe and, providing friends, relatives, and strangers masks that I've been making. So that's been keeping me busy.
And you're in Los Angeles, I take it.
I'm in Los Angeles, yes.
And do you still live in Leimert Park?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Still in the Leimert Park area. I'm not actually in the park area anymore. I'm about 2 blocks from where I used to be.
Right. I'd like to start by reading you something that John Outerbridge, who I had occasion to meet 2 decades ago and remember so clearly and so dearly, and wonder, how is John? I hope someday to reconnect with him. 20 years ago, he said this about your artistic practice. What continues to excite me, John said, is social consciousness and Ramsess's awareness that he maintains the history. What comes to your mind when you hear that, and what does it mean to you to maintain the history? And perhaps I can ask you, what history?
Well, I've been doing this, I guess, since I was 25 years old, and I discovered that when I got out of high school, I didn't know anything about history. What I was taught in high school, I learned nothing. So I decided that I didn't want my children and other kids to growing up not to know who certain people were. So I started doing, people that people needed to recognize, like Paul Robeson and James Baldwin and, Fannie Lou Hamer. So that kind of got me started, but it graduated from there. And I just have always been someone who wanted to maintain the history and the truth that needs to be spoken or needs to be seen.
And when John Outerbridge says what continues to excite me is social consciousness and his awareness that he maintains a history, what comes to your mind when you hear John saying this 20 years ago about social consciousness? What do you think he meant then, and what it might mean to you now in these really troubling times?
Well, I think history is a continuous page, which we're constantly turning that page. And what was happening 20, 30, 40 years ago, it seems like if you don't know your history, you tend to repeat it again. And some of the things that were happening then are happening now, except I think people are becoming more conscious and aware of, how important it is to know, the things that are around in their history and the social conditioning that, if you're, what does it mean to be pulled over constantly by law enforcement when you've done nothing, only simply because, your skin is a different color, or because social conditionings have trained them, this is how you're supposed to treat these people. And it's sad that still goes on, but I think it's coming to a head because people are very conscious of what's going on now, and I think they're tired of it. And I've been on this planet for some 64 years, and I've had my ups and downs and ins and outs with law enforcement, so I know what it's about. But I think back then and now, there are a lot of the same conditionings that existed then that are existing still today. But I think people are becoming more conscious of what's happening with the marching, the social outrage, the artwork that people are doing, and it's just, my sons are in it now. They're like in their 20s and 30s, and they're out there. So it's like, wow, full circle.
Yeah. For a long time, you had a storefront studio space with a Brockman gallery next to the world stage. And I'd love you, Ramsess, to give us a sense of what that was like as a community. A different way of putting it, perhaps, is what was a day like at the Brockman gallery, a day in Leimert Park for you?
Wow. Being in between the world stage and Brockman galleries, my first experience was venturing into the Brockman galleries and seeing what art was all about. I just happened to stumble onto that in the 70s, and of course got fascinated with art and what people were doing, and that was the beginning of my start in art. And then being next to the world stage, having Billy Higgins as a tutor and as a storyteller, along with all the musicians that he brought in there, was so exciting. They'd be in there till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, jamming.
Wow.
And I'm right next door.
I envy you.
Yeah, it was something. I'm telling you, Elvin Jones,
gosh,
Max Roach. I mean, these cats came through there. And it's like, whoa, these cats played with Train and Parker and knew Billie Holiday personally. So it's like, being in the presence of that, and then Billy Higgins telling stories about these guys, and the stories he used to talk about Lester Young when he met Lester Young for the first time.
Wow, I met Billy Higgins only one time through William Claxton, the great jazz photographer.
Yeah.
And that was just so utterly wonderful. It must have been, you must have felt like you were living history, as it were.
You know what? Because I was just getting into jazz and I knew who these cats were, to me it was like standing at the feet of Jesus while they were playing. I mean, it was a whole totally different world, and to watch Elvin Jones up there playing and talking, and then take his shirt off, and all you see is the sweat running off of him, and the audience is going crazy, and people would be driving by wondering what's happening in there, and then these cats would hang around, for hours later, standing out front talking and shooting the bull with everybody. So, but I learned a lot from being in Leimert Park and on Degnan, because it was definitely a life-opening experience for somebody who was just breaking into the art world.
How did jazz, do you think, influence your art practice? And a different question also is jazz something you put on when you do your work?
It's always in me. I put it on, and if I'm doing somebody particular, especially somebody new that I haven't experienced, I'll play their music and listen to them for a while. But, I wasn't into jazz until I came over there to Leimert Park. I was into my, rock and roll and soul music. And it is truly true that it is hard to be around something and not be influenced by it. Because I was around it so much, I got caught up in it and loved it. Started going to jazz festivals, going to jazz clubs, seeking these guys out, these cats that were legends in my mind and legends in everybody else's mind. It was something that I hope one day to write down and to share the experiences that I got listening to these guys.
Will you write them down?
I'll probably end up doing something eventually with my art in some sort of book talking about the cats when I met them and what experience I had with them. Because the stories, I still have the stories in my head. Because it's like listening to, it's like being in elementary school and you're sitting on the floor and your teacher is reading a story to you, and all of a sudden you see every picture, you can taste everything they're talking about, and that's what it was like, being around the art there, being around the jazz musicians, that you can't help but remember all that stuff.
Who's keeping the flame alive now?
Well, the world stage is still going on, and I think the White Tribble.
He's wonderful. He's wonderful.
He's running that.
Just spoke with him. He's absolutely wonderful, and hopefully we'll speak also to Kamau Daoud. Wonderful, yes. Wonderful people, filled with stories.
Oh God, yes, without a doubt. Especially Kamau. Ooh. I mean, Kamau is he is a true storyteller, and he has stories. He has things in him that he has personal information about these guys. I mean, especially because when him and Billy Higgins opened the world stage, it was a whole other world.
You've got to do it. You have to write these stories down. I'm wondering, just very quickly, I mean, were you at all connected to Stanley Crouch?
No, I've only met him once, and I was sorry to hear he passed this morning or yesterday.
Yeah, just now.
Yeah.
And when I read his obituary and I knew I was going to speak to you, I thought, I have to ask Ramsess if he knew Stanley Crouch, because I knew he knew that scene. I mean, he was a very cantankerous man. I can't remember who called him Stanley Ouch, but he was. Sorry, I mean it respectfully. But,
No. I've heard that, but I met him at a festival, and the time that I met him, I recognized his face, but I didn't really know who he was. And he was looking at the work that I was doing, and said something about that. I'm keeping the music alive with the images, because some of these images that he was looking at, people didn't know who Fats Navarro is. And you got Fats Navarro up there? I said, yeah, well, I've got a lot of cats that need to be remembered, And they said, you keeping the music alive. And that was my experience with Stanley, and my only conversation. And I didn't realize who I was talking to until probably years later. Was that guy that came into the booth.
Now, one key figure for you, and we've had occasion on the Quarantine Tapes to speak about him quite often, which is quite wonderful now to ask you about your own experience with Paul Robeson, and how deeply it would seem important he was to you. You've said about your first drawing of Paul Robeson, that's what actually started me, finding people who had done great things in history, black history, but weren't mentioned in the history books I was given in school. I wanted to make it possible for students to have images and a story to go along with them. Bring me back to that moment. And in a way, I see in that moment your practice which nearly is a practice of saving in some way.
Well, I think it was in 1977, January, Paul Robeson died. And I just remember the story that was on the news that Paul Robeson had died. And all they had was him singing that song, Old Man River. And I said, God, who is this Paul Robeson guy? And I looked him up, and I realized that this man is somebody that I should have known about my entire life, but it was kept out of the history books. So I said I wanted a picture of him, and I found an encyclopedia that had a small picture of him as the Emperor Jones in it. And I took that picture and I started sketching it out, and that was the first drawing that I ever done. Matter of fact, I was at college in LACC, and they used the picture on the front of the newspaper, but it wasn't completed. The drawing wasn't finished. It was just a half drawing of Robeson's face. But after that was the spark that started everything. Was Paul Robeson. I wanted to make sure that people knew other people like Robeson, that not just in Black history, but in history itself, because even with Dalton Trumbull, I had done Dalton Trumbull, and a lot of people don't know who Dalton Trumbull was and what he stood for. And, so I wanted to be a part of history and putting it down, that making sure that people knew, or at least I put images out there with little bios on the back of the cars that people could read about who this person was, or still is, if they're still alive. So, but he was the spark of it, Paul Robeson.
Well, and again, I really didn't know the whole extent of Paul Robeson's history until very recently, and so much more than the operatic singer we know. I mean, such an interesting and diverse life. When you say you put it in the back of cards, what do you mean?
I make 5x7 greeting cards.
Yes.
And so the image is on the front, and then their bios are on the back of it. And so you can read about, what their life was about, what they said. I try and find quotes, and sometimes there's quotes that are very famous quotes, and people don't know where it came from. And then I research and find out these quotes came from people who said something. And I remember Belafonte saying something about Robeson, about they all followed him down this road, and Robeson told him that, I got to go down this road. I'm going to go all the way. You guys can go as far as you can go, and then I know you'll have to stop, but I'm going all the way. And I'm not going to fault you for stopping, because some of you can't go all the way. You have to stop, but at least you've gotten on the road and traveled it. And he was somebody who gave his entire life to, social justice and to help the struggle against not just black people, but all people. If you study ropes, you know that he was a Renaissance man, and he went all over the world to help people who were suffering from oppression and from their government, and just basically helping people, with his song and his belief. And so as many times as I can, I'll lift this man up because, I had him on my calendar when he turned 100 as Man of the Century, and he was somebody that you needed to know.
And Belafonte, again, such an extraordinary figure who also went all the way and continues to go all the way. And I'm always reminded of this line of Belafonte who said that, you can cage the singer, but you can't cage the song.
That's right. So true. Woo.
Gives one chills, doesn't it? And in a way, the cards you do, in a sense, they go out in the world, and do they fulfill the function you see yourself having as a what one might call a community artist?
It does, because one thing I get so much feedback on is that when people tell me they got this card in the mail and they tell me, I'm going to frame this card. I'm going to frame it with the bio out, because it's not a card that you just get and toss to the side. It's one of those, even teachers to this day come and get these cards at the store, particular store that I have, and they use them in the classroom. They say every year they pull these cards out, and the kids read about the person, and they play their music, or they'll play a movie on the person, or they'll have them write something about, pick somebody who's on the wall and write a small story about what you found out about that person. And it all started with the cards.
Well, I see it as a reenactment of your own discovery of Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
It triggers young people to do what you did, which is look him up, find out more, delve deeper.
And if you're in the environment, that's the key thing, is that if you're surrounded by something, you can't help but pick it up.
Right.
Even if you don't want to be a part of it, because when I was teaching art, some of the kids, they want to be involved in it. And that's okay. Well, you don't have to be involved with it, but you can't leave the classroom. And so they would be sitting around there, and all of a sudden they start standing up and coming over to it and seeing and helping doing something, and all of a sudden they're creating the art. They don't realize that they actually have become a part of it. And some of those students, some of the ones that were fighting me the hardest, became the best artists, because they found another way to express what they were feeling through the art.
And you never needed to tell them, do art. Just no, which is
just be around it.
Yeah,
if you're around it, you can't help it.
And one of the other things, Ramsess, that really struck me is your relationship to money.
Money. That stuff still exists.
No, but it seems that it brought back a wonderful line of Arthur Miller, who said, "Don't be seduced into thinking that which does not make a profit is without value."
Exactly. God, I wish I would have said that, because my whole thing is that I'm not a poor artist and I'm not a rich artist. I'm just a artist that enjoys what I do, and it's never been a job. And my whole thing is that I'll give away more things that I've done than I'll sell, because it's important that if I see somebody comes up to where I'm selling something or displaying a booth, and they look at something and they really like it, and they don't have the funds to get it, I said, well, let's take it. And when you get something, pass it on to somebody else, because it'll all come back. And I've been doing that for years. And it's not like it's like I just got through printing my latest calendars, and I've given away so far about 80 of them. I only printed 1,000. So it's like, okay, well, that's my biggest problem is I see somebody who sees something. Hey, you want one of the calendars? I got one in the car. I just pass them out. But it comes full circle, because it's like it will eventually
come back.
It comes back. It does come back.
Of course, I want to talk to you a little bit about this project you did for the Onassis Foundation, for the Enter project. You submitted an artist's statement where you said, "I do what I do as an artist to bring beauty to the world. These masks, you made masks, are my contribution to and acknowledgement of my place as a useful and productive member of our human society.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on this? I found the statement so short and so precise.
Well, the mask is something that I wanted to do and give away, and also make it an artistic piece of art. So you're not just getting something that's going to help to protect you, but you're getting a piece of artwork also. So you might not think of it as artwork, but it's actually, hand sewn or machine sewn. It's cut, it's designed that you can wear it on both sides. And it's a safety factor, something that's going to help protect your life. At least we hope it is.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to sell them because I didn't want to make a profit off of the suffering of what's happening in the world. And it was so simple to sit here and make 1,000 masks, in a couple of weekends, and just pass them out. It was. I still to this day get people ask me, can I come by and get 3 masks from you? Can I get 4 masks? I got some friends that need some masks, and they would rather wear, even though sometimes it's a little heavy, they would rather wear one of these masks than a paper mask because they feel more safe with something that's got 3 layers on it.
How many did you make?
Oh, I've made probably about 6,000 to 7,000 of them so far and passed them out. I usually make, on the weekends, I usually make about maybe 150 of them.
So you're continuing to make them?
Oh, yeah.
The little video you produced is so beautiful for the foundation. And what was particularly beautiful, quite apart from seeing how you layer the masks and the textile, and how these works are reversible, they have 2 sides, 2 very different sides, is seeing you then taking these masks out on the street and giving them to people. Did you give them to people randomly?
I gave them randomly, and then I gave them to some people who were passing out food, and they were passing them out because people were not suspicious of what I was doing, but wondering what I was doing. So what I started doing was, instead of just handing them out, I started putting them in the cards, putting them in the bags of the cards. So you'd get a card of someone like Robeson or Malcolm X with the mask. So you are reading something and getting something, a mask at the same time. So that way it made it a little bit more not so suspicious that somebody's trying to give them something that doesn't have. Because people I found out that they tend not to want to take it from you if it was just loose. But if you put it in a bag, it's something totally different.
Right. It becomes like a gift you can really give.
Yeah, so I figured that, I got all these cards, put them in the bag with the cards, and it became so much easier. So that's that's what I do is I put them in the bag with the cards, and so you can see the mask on one side and the card on the other side.
So there is, in a way, not only a protective element to it, not only a beautiful element, as you say, you want to add beauty to the world, but there's, one could say, an educational purpose. Yeah,
you definitely could, because you're definitely going to get, if you stop to read the image, you're going to get educated if you don't know. It's like the Kobe Bryant card. I put so much on his card, might be things that you don't know, because I included all 7 of the other people who were on the helicopter with him. So it wasn't just about Kobe, but it was about him, his family, the people who were with him, and then what he had accomplished in his short lifetime. And so those messages are on the cards when I'm passing them out to them.
So people are wearing your art. Have you come across, while walking on the street or bicycling or however you might get around, seeing people wear the masks and just being perhaps taken aback or surprised or delighted?
Yeah, I have done that because I can tell they're my masks simply because of the elastic I have on the outside of it. They're real colorful.
They are very colorful.
I don't use a black and white material. Strings on it. So, and then I remember the mask. I remember because I make them, and when I run out of materials, then I go out and buy more material, and then I've had some material donated to me. But I always try and find something that's unusual to make, so people would feel, they feel good about wearing something, not just a dark mask or a white mask. because it has some image on it.
Well, I can't wait to encourage all the listeners to go and see the little video on Onassis Enter and see how you do those masks. I heard, the part of the program with the foundation was to give you 6 days to come up with an idea and to execute it. And I heard that when you were told that you had 6 days to do it, you were not taken aback. You said, in 6 days I could build a house.
Believe it or not, I could. Yeah, well, that was when they said 6. That's why I shot it with the newspaper,
right?
So they could see the dates on it. So it's okay, boom, boom, boom. Okay, he did it in 6. He did it in 4 days. It was like, okay, we're finished. You
did it very quickly. It didn't at all. This deadline didn't at all make you anxious.
No. Plus, I had the time to do it.
And the idea.
Yeah. Well,
Ramsess, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, really a pleasure. And I hope that when we go back to the possibility of seeing each other in person, I get to see you, maybe come and hear some music at the world stage and see your work. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Paul. It's been so easy. You made this conversation so easy.
Well, it's been wonderful. It's really been wonderful. I hope we can listen to some music together someday. I really would love that.
Sounds like a winner. All right.
All the best to you. Take care of yourself and stay safe and make more masks.
Thank you, though.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.